All right, guys. So for today for science, we're in a new book. We're in our science unit 3, Earth's changing landscape. We're in lesson 1, slow changes to Earth's landscape. And then we're going to be starting on page 12. So the book you guys are going to need is going to be this one here. Let's see if I can go all the way back. This is the book you're going to need. All right. It says grade 2, unit 3. It has this picture of this canyon and it says Earth's changing landscape. This is the book you guys are going to need for today. All right. You guys go ahead and open that. And then while you guys get there, I'm actually going to be using the online version so we can also see some of the videos that they have. Remember to make sure you're in the OISP elementary school page. You guys are going to click on lessons. And then we are going to be on unit 3, slow changes to Earth's landscape, which is lesson 1. Then we're going to be looking at that reading about weathering. Let me go back on here. Okay, you saw weather and pebbles break down chalk into smaller pieces. Oh, and you guys didn't see that because we didn't do that activity. So let's go ahead and watch that activity. So we're not going to do this activity. We're just going to watch it. Okay, guys?
In this lesson, we will use evidence to explain how wind and water change Earth's landscape. Let's look back at the video you saw earlier in the lesson. What effect do you think water is having on the rocks at the bottom of the cliffs? In this activity, you'll observe how water and rocks can change other rocks. To carry out this investigation, you'll use safety goggles, 10 pebbles, 8 small pieces of chalk, a jar with a lid, a stopwatch, a hand lens, water, and a paper towel. To complete this activity, you'll shake pebbles, chalk, and water in different combinations to observe the effects. Before you begin, make a prediction. How will water and rocks affect the way chalk changes? Take a moment to share your prediction with your classmates, then select Continue. Before you begin, to protect your eyes, you'll need to put on your safety goggles. Start by using your hand lens to observe the 4 pieces of chalk. Now place the 10 pebbles and 4 pieces of chalk in the jar. Attach the lid to the jar by twisting the lid clockwise. Twist the lid until you can't turn it anymore. For the next step, your partner will use the stopwatch to time you as you shake the jar for 2 minutes. Remember to hold on to the jar tightly with both hands as you shake it. Stop shaking the jar when your partner tells you to. Leave the lid on your jar as you observe the chalk with the hand lens. What do you see? Wait a minute before removing the lid. Carefully remove the lid. Pick out the 4 pieces of chalk and place them in front of you. Use the hand lens to get a closer look at the chalk. Pick out the 10 pebbles and set them down in front of you. Slowly and carefully empty any powder in the jar into a trash can. Move slowly so you do not create a cloud of chalk dust. Now record your data. In your notebook, draw what you observed. Select Continue when you finish recording. Next, you're going to see what effect adding water has when you shake the pebbles and chalk. Do you think there will be a difference? Discuss your ideas with your group. Add the 10 pebbles and 4 new pieces of chalk to the jar. Slowly pour the water into the jar. Attach the lid to the jar. Turn the lid until it is tight. Just as before, your partner will use the stopwatch to time you as you shake the jar for 2 minutes. Remember to hold on to the jar tightly with both hands as you shake it. Stop shaking the jar when your partner tells you to. Observe the jar, water, pebbles, and chalk. Walk to the sink. Loosen the lid on the jar, but do not remove the lid completely. We want to empty the water, but stop the solid pieces of chalk and pebbles from falling into the sink. Carefully empty the water into the sink. Rinse the sink with water, then return to your workspace. Carefully remove the lid. Pick out the 4 pieces of chalk and place them in front of you. If your chalk is still wet, you can place it on a folded paper towel. We used a sheet of black construction paper to make observing the chalk easier. Use the hand lens to get a closer look at the chalk. What differences do you see? Record your data. Draw or write about the chalk in your notebook. When you finish recording your data, look at the 3 pieces of chalk. Going from left to right on the screen, you see the chalk that was shaken with the water and pebbles, the chalk that was shaken with just pebbles, and a piece of chalk that was not shaken at all. Now that you've finished collecting your data, take some time to communicate. Use your data to complete the Communicate Information section.
All right, so now that we've seen it, you saw water and pebbles break down chalk into smaller pieces. With no shaking, that piece of chalk was very clean. There wasn't any rough edges. It was just very smooth. When it was shaken with the rocks, what ended up happening was it became a little bit smaller. There was dust. And then when it was, or powder, and then when it was shaken with both the water and the rocks, it got even smaller, it broke down even more. So the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces is called weathering. Water and wind can break down rocks into small rocks. Small rocks can break down into sand or soil. Over time, weathering changes the shape and size of rocks. How did weathering change the rock below? Tiny grains of sand can cause big changes in a desert. Winds blow sand against tall rocks. The sand cuts the rocks like a knife. The shape of the rocks change slowly over time. So look at this. A person did not come into this area and create this rock. It was the sand, and it was the wind. The wind would blow the sand against these rocks, and the sand would cut the rocks like a knife. And that's how the rock changes. And it takes a long time for it to do it. It happens slowly over time. Think about the changing rocks activity. How did that activity show weathering? And so that activity that it's asking about is this one right here, which we just watched in that video. So over time, that piece of chalk, if there was water, it continued, and the rocks continued, that chalk would eventually disintegrate into just the powder. You have read that blowing sand can change the shape of a rock. Explain why you can't see that kind of change. Because it happens little by little over time. It's just these tiny grains. And so even if, it takes off one little speck of this rock here, you don't notice it because it takes a really, really long time for those changes to show. Imagine imagine trying to go to the beach and trying to count every piece of sand that there is. It's impossible. There's so many little ones. Or if you guys have salt at home, and if you just pour a little bit of salt in your hand and you try to count every speck, it would take you a really, really long time because they're all so little and it's so small. So just like how it would take you a really long time to count each one, it takes a long time for the sand to change the shape of a rock. All right, we are going to skip this next inquiry activity and we're going to go straight to erosion. Erosion. What happened to your sand mountain when you blew on it? Erosion. Erosion happens when wind or water carries rocks and soil to a new place. So imagine you have some sand or some salt in your palm and you blow on it. it's going to move off of your hand. Some of it might stay, but some of it might leave off. It might end up on the floor. It might end up on the table. Sometimes you can see erosion taking place. For example, right here, moving brown water tells you that erosion is happening. So with this water is falling down. It's streaming down. And with it, this water is turning brown. Why? Because the water is mixing with the soil. And so the soil is now the water is moving that soil to a different location. The water is brown because it is carrying soil. Look at the photo. How can you tell erosion is happening? Circle the evidence that tells you, explain how you know. Well, erosion can make it hard for plants to grow because it's constantly moving the soil and maybe the seeds that it needs. And how do we know that erosion is happening? Because that water here is brown. And we know that the water is brown because it's carrying all of that soil to a different location. Now, before we read this next page, let's go ahead and watch this video. Go online and watch the video, Earth Changes Slowly, to see more slow changes to Earth's location.
This boy's hair is about to become shorter. That is a quick change. Changes happen to Earth too.
Oops, sorry.
This boy's hair is about to become shorter. That is a quick change. Changes happen to Earth too. Some of those changes are quick, and some are very slow. What can cause a slow change to Earth? Wind and water can cause slow changes when part of Earth is exposed to water or wind for a long time. What do you think of when you hear a long time? We usually talk about time using seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, and years. But when talking about Earth, we often hear millions of years to describe time. Let's break that down. Each of your birthdays is 12 months, or 1 year apart. 1,000,000 years is 1,000 birthdays times 1,000 birthdays. Some slow changes take millions of years. Let's look at how this happens. Wind and water change Earth through weathering and erosion. Weathering is when wind or water reshape Earth by breaking apart rocks. Erosion happens when small bits of rock or soil are moved from one place to another. Professional geologists are able to tell which landforms are formed by wind and which are created by water because they often have very different shapes. How does water weather rock? Flowing water carries sand and pebbles. The sand and pebbles hit the rock and cause it to break. Water also carries away pieces of broken rock. Do you remember what this process is called? Erosion. The water weathering process can break off tiny pieces of rock until the rocks look smooth, like this. Wind can also weather rock. This happens when wind carries grains of sand or other material. The rough sand removes tiny bits of rock. This wind weathering process can create landforms such as these. Sand dunes are an example of erosion caused by wind. These sand dunes in Death Valley National Park began forming over 12,000 years ago. Wind carried sand from one place and deposited it in another place, creating these waves of sand. At least 5 million years ago, weathering and erosion by water began carving out the Grand Canyon. Sand and pebbles carried by water broke off tiny pieces of rock. Erosion occurred when those broken rocks flowed down the river. This canyon was made by sand, pebbles, water, and lots of time. The water of the Colorado River continues to carry away little bits of rock today, but this change is so slow that it would take many years to see a change. Waterfalls are also created by water, weathering, and erosion. This is water flowing over the edge of a rock cliff at Niagara Falls. The flowing water falls over 170 feet into the plunge pool below the cliff. But these falls were not always so tall. Over 12,000 years ago, the river began weathering and eroding the rock. An area of softer rock eroded faster than the harder rock, creating a step. The step became taller. The force of falling water hitting rock continued to weather the rock at the bottom of the falls, and a pool formed. Over 12,000 years, the water weathered and eroded the rock to create Niagara Falls. Let's look at more examples of weathering and erosion. This is an example of wind eroding sandstone. Notice the smooth surface? When wind reshapes rock, it creates a smooth surface. The long steps and grooves in this sandstone were also created slowly by wind weathering. What do you think caused this formation? What about this one? Here's a few more weathering and erosion examples. Can you tell if it was wind or water that created them?
That was water. Water created this. What about this? It was wind. The wind created that arch. What about this one? Sand. It was water and wind. What about this one? Wind. All right. So now let's go ahead and finish up with the next page, which was page 19. Frozen water can also cause erosion. A glacier is a large sheet of ice that moves slowly across the land. A glacier moves when a bit of the ice melts. A glacier picks up and breaks apart pieces of rock as it moves across the land. This kind of erosion happens over many years. Look at the photo of the river above. How is this erosion different from the erosion shown on page 18? Then here's a fast-flowing river can also cause erosion. The river carries away bits of rock over time. So the question again asks, look at the photo of the river above. So here's this river. This is a fast-flowing river, and it's causing erosion. The river carries away bits of rock over time. And so that's how I created this like river and these gaps, and you can see like the rocks have been affected by it. How is this erosion different from the soil erosion shown on the previous photo, which is right here? How are these two different? And you can say something like, it took many years for the river to carry away bits of the land on each side. The erosion on the field in the previous photo, it happens very quickly. And a lot of the reason why is because soil is softer than the rocks in that river. So remember, just like in the Niagara Falls, whatever is softer and lighter, that's going to be carried away much more easily. All right, I think the last thing you guys have is going to be your evaluate. I'm just going to quickly go over the geologist because this is going to be a part of your evaluate. So I'm just going to read it to you guys. Geologists study Earth and its materials. They study soil and water. They also study how landscapes change. A geologist can tell whether a landform was shaped by wind or water erosion. Geologists also study natural disasters. A flood is an example of a natural disaster. Geologists try to predict where these events happen. They share their findings with other scientists. A soil conservationist reads their findings to see how much soil was eroded in a flooded area. All right, how did this rock get its shape? So everyone should now be on page 26. Very good, guys. Everybody be on page 26. How did this rock get its shape? Look how cool that is. It looks like an open door. It looks like a door that leads somewhere. Now, someone didn't go into that rock and cut it with the knife. This happened naturally through weathering. So how did this rock get its shape? Explain what has happened to this rock. Why is it shaped this way? Very nice. So what you guys are going to put, weathering and erosion. So weathering, remember, is breaking down of something where it is, and then erosion is when something is carried away. So little pieces of that rock are carried away by the wind and the water. So when weathering and erosion changed this rock, pieces of sand and rock carried in the water wore away the surface, and then water flowing through the opening carried these pieces away. It was so what made this happen? It was the wind and water, it was the weathering and the erosion. Weathering and erosion. All right, three-dimensional thinking. Let's see if you guys can get this one. Number one. Okay, I know if you guys aren't able to write it yet, don't worry. I'm gonna put this video up and you guys can also put it in your own words. I will put the video up for you guys. Okay. Which sentence about weathering and erosion is false? Which one is false? Okay, A, erosion can be caused by wind or water. B, weathering can be caused by wind or water. C, erosion is the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces. Or D, sometimes erosion can be seen as it happens and sometimes it cannot. There is only one that is wrong. Which of those is false? Which of those is false? A, erosion can be caused by wind or water. Erosion, again, is when things are moved from one place to another, and that could be from wind or water. So that is true. B, weathering can be caused by wind or water. Weathering is when something is breaking down into smaller pieces, and that can be done by wind and water. That is true. C, erosion is the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces. Angelica is correct. Erosion is not the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces. Erosion is when something is moved from one place to another. Erosion is when little bits of pieces of rocks are taken away and moved somewhere else. So it must be C, but let's double check D. Sometimes erosion can be seen as it happens, like with the soil, and sometimes it cannot, like with a river. Very good. Explain why the statement you circled in question 1 is false. Weathering is the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces. Erosion is when the bits of rocks get carried away. And I know that we're going through these kind of quickly, so don't worry, you guys will still have this video and then we'll review it again tomorrow before you guys take your quiz. So you guys can take your time on it, because after we go over all the answers, you guys will be able to review this video afterwards. Okay, let's go to our final page for today, which is going to be extended. You are a geologist, page 28. You came across a rock formation shown on page 12. Write a page in a field guide about what you see. Use the words what, when, why, where, and how to ask questions about what you observe. Write answers to these questions on your field guide page What questions do you still have about slow changes to Earth's landscape? You know what? Actually, we're not going to do that. So let's go ahead and take out page 28. Oh, I think I did it wrong. Yeah, so we're going to take out page 28 and then we're just going to stop at page 27. All right. So that is it for today. What you guys are going to do for the rest of the day. Okay. So it's only 1:15. You still have 30 minutes of science. So I'm going to post this video and you guys can finish writing in the work you need. At 1:45, you guys need to make sure you're completing your one activity of a week. You could be doing art lessons, health lessons, or social emotional learning lessons. Don't forget, you guys have access to our monthly library, which also has videos now. It also has art lesson videos. You can go to Google Classroom, click on classwork, and then go to monthly libraries. If you click on all libraries, you're going to see all the libraries. And now that we're coming up on the holiday season, if there's any specific holidays that you guys want to look up, for example, I believe there is one here on Christmas. There's Jewish holidays. Let's see if I can find it. I don't see it here. Summer break, superheroes, Valentine's, fairy tales, inclusion, parties. There are some books on rocks and minerals, which we're talking about. Spring. I don't see it. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and look for those some winter books, and then I'll put it in the chat, or not in the chat. I'll post them in our monthly libraries for you guys. But if you click on any of these pictures, not only will it give you read alouds, but it'll also give you guys some stories as well. I'm sorry, some videos as well. Okay. So not only are there actual just books, but there's also going to be pictures and art lessons that you can draw as well. All right. So there's tons of different stories and books you guys can look at. Feel free to just pick and choose what you guys like. And then you guys can talk about it or write about it or draw about it in Google, in Class Dojo. Okay, it's right here. So if you go to resource links, click on resource links under classwork in Google Classroom, click on resource links, and then it'll be right here under monthly libraries, All right. The last thing is make sure you read any book you'd like for 20 minutes. It's going to be very helpful to you guys. And I think that is it. So if you guys have any questions, you guys can stay. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow morning.